G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. If you've got your finger on the pulse when it comes to property investing, there's probably one part of the country that receives a lot of intention, a lot of debate as to whether it's the right place to invest. And I'm talking about Perth. It has become such a hotspot for property investors, lower price point than say the Eastern Seaboard, really, really strong yields as well. And then you get the opposite end of the spectrum, which is people going, I don't touch it because it's so volatile and it's a one-trick pony, which is mining. And anyone that's on the ground says, look, I beg to differ. And Jared Mann, who we brought on today's show, has boots on the ground, is an investor himself, knows the Perth market inside out, has a great report that he's just put out too. So for us, what we're really looking forward to is unpacking the whole Perth debate. And I guess when you overlay that with some of the stats that Perth is some of the highest incomes in the country, and it's got some of the lower price points in the country, it really kind of you scratch your head going, what is going on there? So if you're a bit like me and you're curious, this is the episode to check out. Hey Jared, welcome on mate. How you doing?
Thanks for having us,
mate. Returning serve because I jumped on your podcast, which. We had a great chat, the Perth Property Insider podcast, which was really good fun. Man, I had a few people reach out off the back of our chat, so thank you very much.
Oh, good,
excellent, mate. I know you've been an investor yourself. You've done quite well. You've obviously had some real skin in the game, which is you've worked on properties, renovated, for example. Property management is your bread and butter. But for us that don't know your story, can you fill us a little bit in what I call the 3 Ps about yourself personally, professionally, and your property journey to date?
Well, personally, it's hard to separate investing from my life because it's very integrated from a fairly young age. I got given the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad when I was 16 by a family friend, and that really just opened up my whole eyes to what was possible, and you didn't need that amazing education and didn't need necessarily the high-paying job, and it just really lit a fire under me from that 16 years of age that, I want to try to improve my life. And we never had much money growing up. My dad was an engineer, and I sort of followed in his footsteps to become an engineer because I didn't know what else to do with myself. And I was always looking for my way out and, how do I try to create wealth and have a better life than what I had growing up. So it wasn't, we always had food on the table, but, I distinctly remember the other kids getting money for stuff at the canteen and me having to sort of have basic lunches each day and have the hand-me-downs from the op shop at the school, the secondhand school clothes. And, my parents did the best that they could, but they never knew much about or never got involved in investing, and I sort of ended up teaching them and opening that world up to them as well. So
isn't that an interesting perspective where you then go on to teach your parents? Obviously they're open and receptive to it. Some kids tell their parents like, what do you know, young whippersnipper? It's we're the parents here, versus your parents are quite open and receptive. How does that conversation go? I'm very curious there.
Well, it's a bit of a funny story because from 16 I started, consuming every book that I could find. And back in the day, there was very little books available here in Australia. I sort of ordered some from the US and went into the local libraries and found some in there. And there was only one sort of forum or place to learn, and that was the Summersoft Property Investment Forum back in the day. So I used to be on there and get help from the more seasoned investors. And Michael Yardney was one of the people, this is 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago. And he was helping me. He was just, this is before I think he even had his buyer's agency. So he was just an investor then too. So I started out writing a bit of a business plan and taking it around to my neighbours. And in the plan, it was to get them to be a money partner for me and put up the upfront deposit. And I would find the property, renovate it, and we'd sell it on completion. And so I took this around to my next door neighbours who we knew quite well. And one of them put their hand up and said, yep, I want to be your money partner, Jared. And I was all thrilled. I've got got a money partner, like, first steps to getting going. And I went home and told my parents about it, and they were like, let me see what on earth have you put in this business plan? Like, let me see what's in here. And they ended up reading it and deciding that they would be my money partner. And that was their first, step towards investing. And we ended up going 50-50 in our first deal together. So
it's incredible, mate. How do I say this politely? Were you like a bit of a nerd's not the right word, but were you a diligent student to go, I've got two kids, mate. I'm not sure if I'd take advice from a 16-year-old child. Can you see where I'm going?
By the time that I did this, I was 20.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm definitely pretty special. Or, I'm definitely a nerd. You have to be to become an engineer and to go and love like data and all the things that I do. So, how people feel about nerds has changed a lot now that nerds have money.
That's exactly it. That's why I said it may be a backhanded compliment, but please do take that as a compliment in the sense that, you've probably got a good head on your shoulders to that sense. A 20-year-old, I know, mate, I was making every mistake in the book at 20 when it came to money. But at your stage, there's probably a sense of maturity. 20 years old, an ability to see the future is something special for a male under 25 that hasn't their brain's not fully formed yet. So I think for us, for you, kudos to you, buddy. And I think let's unpack that journey where you start off with first property, you're 50-50 your parents, and how does it snowball from that point onwards?
Well, my other brother was involved quite heavily because I wrote a little letter, which was, looking for do you want to sell, cash buyer, ready to go, contact us, quick decisions. And I used to drop him off on his BMX bike because he was 5 years younger than me. And I was paying him by the hour to cycle around the suburbs that I'd researched and drop off these letters to any house that looked derelict. And we ended up buying our first two properties that way, which was just unbelievable, really. The first one, someone called me and they'd already moved out of the property and they just said, look, I need this gone. It was a pretty hot market at that time too. So it can be done really in any market. And I still know people today that have success with their flyer drops. And the owner said, what will you pay me for it? And I went around, looked at it, did some spreadsheet numbers working back from the renovated selling price and factoring in, cost to fix it all up and purchase costs and cost to sell. And I put in a 15% margin and I went to the seller and just said, this is what it's worth to me. I've worked backwards from, told them how I arrived at the price, and they needed out quickly and ended up agreeing to that. And when we had the bank, I remember it really well because you always remember your first deal, don't you? Absolutely. So it was $189,000 purchase price for a 3x1 in Huntingdale in Perth here, and the bank valued it at $240 on settlement, which was pretty cool to have some equity before I'd done anything.
Yeah.
And then we spent about $30K on a reno, which we, when I first started, we did everything ourselves in the renovation, and you learn a lot of lessons, and I wouldn't want to do everything myself again was the main lesson. But we developed a bit of a formula we're going to paint the walls this color, and we're going to do the kitchens this way, and we're going to tile the bathrooms this way. And we sort of then ended up keeping that property, renting it out because the market was going up so strongly. And in truth, when you buy in a hot market, it was actually increasing month on month by far more than what we, in the time it took us to do the reno, which I think was 4 or 5 months, we'd made more from the market increasing than we did our reno.
Yeah, right.
But it was a lot easier if I just let the market do the work and not me do the work. So that was a bit of a lesson too.
Nice work. It's I've heard people like Sam Gordon talk about buying, sweat equity, do some work on the property as well. And I think when you talk about, when was this property, 2000 something? When did you buy this?
Probably about 2004, 2003, 2004.
So when you're buying in 2004, for example, I mean, you're talking tens of thousands of dollars in uplift. Now when you get the right property, we're talking hundreds of $1,000s potentially when you get it right. That's especially when you buy in like Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane, for example. The right property can give you an exponential lift. For example, when you get the right, you do the right renovation or you do the right subdivision, whatever you're doing on the property, you get a much bigger percentage increase based on, I guess, the values of properties nowadays as well. So thanks very much. So take me through what's happened. You got the first one under your belt, you go in and you keep chipping away at your portfolio.
Well, we sort of kept going with the formula of renovating, and after we did a few more, we went into doing small subdivisions where we'd build on the rear, renovate the front, sell the front, kept the rear in a few cases for a while, and then sold where it was appropriate. And the thing I found, which was most difficult when you've got a joint venture partner, is having the same goals. You can have the same goals for a 6 or 12-month period, but where it becomes hard is over time your alignment can change. And with my parents, they were preparing and wanting to take less risk and to pay down debt and to prepare for retirement. And whereas I was really just getting started. So it served me well to that point. I refinanced them out of one property. We sold the others, and chunking up that money sort of got me to roll into the next one and to actually get some deposit to work for myself to put into deals. So it got me to where I got to, but it wasn't a forever thing.
And so what does the portfolio look at? Again, what are you comfortable to share? Where are you today?
I mean, when I was 25, I was having a whole bunch of problems with my property managers, and I nearly sold all the properties at that point because I had a property vacant. I had damage on another property. I had a tenant that skipped town, and I was like, should investing be this hard? And that was a sort of key moment where I looked around for a property manager, interviewed lots of different ones, tried others that didn't work. And then I had that opportunity of starting the business Investors Edge Real Estate with someone I'd met that was a very seasoned property manager, and she was pretty disillusioned with the industry as well. And that's where we got our start. And to be honest, at the beginning, I never really wanted to be a property manager myself. I just saw that opportunity and thought, hey, we can't find anyone else to do this really well. Like, how do we do it with an investment mindset instead of just that usual employee mindset? And how do we do it with really great service? And that was pretty unique back in the day because, there was only sort of one other investment specialist, and then every other property manager was more just a bigger franchise group that didn't compare. So at different points in time, I sold a few properties to put money into the business. So that actually, the wealth that I'd created so far to that point enabled me to have some startup capital. And it was very rough going to begin with when you go from having an engineer's income down to nothing. And, we started organically from scratch. And I thought you just put a website up and you'd rent a premises and that people would flood in. No, they didn't initially. Like I used to go out to coffees with any investor that would have me pay for their coffee, and I'd sit down with them and ask, what would you want in a property management service? What would you want as a sales agent if you could dream up anything? And because we were so nimble and such a startup, I'd go back, change the website. They want a guarantee for communication. How about we'll pay them $100 if we don't return calls and emails in the same day? And that was my first guarantee because someone said that they were frustrated with the communication, and I kept hearing that same frustration. So we've still stuck with that guarantee, and people love it because it keeps us on our toes, and all the team now abide by that too.
Mate, to set a bar like that within your team that's an excellent commitment to client service, mate. So putting your money where your mouth is, mate, that's for sure. Kudos.
So linking back around to property, I then sort of started to build the portfolio up again, and I did some joint purchases with my business partner. And about 7 or 8 years ago, my business partner and we fell out of alignment. We were perfectly great for 7 or 8 years, but then she started preparing for retirement too, and things changed. She was taking, long holidays for longer periods, and we were getting remunerated the same despite her being away. And she just we ended up deciding that she wanted to get out of the business. She decided. And so I had to come up with a very large amount of money very quickly, and I wasn't prepared for that. So I sold all my portfolio at that point, including the joint properties with her, to pay her out. And it was a really difficult point because I had to sort of transition to being the sole owner and leader of the business, as well as having that financial weight on my shoulders. And it was the top of the Perth market in 2015-16 when she got out. So the rental prices were really high at that point too. So she chose her timing well. And after that point, I went through one of the most difficult periods in business that I'd ever had, which was 3 or 4 years where our rental prices dropped by 30%. And my business income was all tied to that. The sale turnover stopped a lot as well. And, it was really survival and, eating glass for 2 or 3 years and questioning, do I stay in this or not? So it was really hard to invest or do anything over that time. And it was really hard to sit on the sidelines. And I helped a lot of clients progress and, being in a real estate agent and managing properties, selling properties, and now a buyer's agent. You get to learn from going through all their transactions. And I was just continuing to upskill myself and gain more experience through that as well. So when it came time to, start looking at investing again, I had to this is about 4 years ago. So profits were up in the business. Our market was starting to look good. I was really sitting back and deciding, well, what strategy do I want to take this time? But last time I was focusing on the lower end properties because that's what I could afford and I was value adding, and it served me well. And it got me to where I got to. But this time I decided to more focus on buying quality, more blue chip. It had higher, obviously, negative gearing, but everything's case by case. And initially, when I was starting out, I couldn't afford that negative gearing. Now I more look at properties as a storehouse of my wealth, and the negative gearing is not, is very manageable and it's still a small portion of my overall, profit. So I prefer to take that approach because the growth is more important to me, because if I make more income now, I'm just going to pay more tax on it, and I'd rather the growth to be compounding at its highest rate. And that's sort of the strategy I've mainly taken over the last 4 years. And I've leapfrogged our homes. So we bought our home our first home with a bit of an investment lens on. And when we upgraded about 3 years ago, we kept that one, and I bought the next home with an investment lens too. And we've just upgraded and settling our new home today, of all days. So pretty exciting.
Congrats.
So we're keeping the current home as well as another investment. And that's really worked well for us because we haven't had to pay as many buying and selling costs. The home has performed well as an investment, as well as being a lovely home. And it's also I've been able to use equity the first time and continue to have them working for me. So I've diversified the last 2 to 3 years to other states of Australia to have a bit of balance on Perth. So I've got 4 properties in Perth and 1 in Brisbane and 1 in Melbourne. Melbourne. And we're sitting at a $13.4 million portfolio with about 4.9 million equity.
Jeez, mate, well done. Congrats.
So that's sort of really just been from the last 4 years of rebuilding with that higher quality focus. And
Congratulations, mate. I mean, to bounce back during that time in business, it takes it takes a lot of soul searching, and
Yeah.
I think when you put all your eggs in the one basket, you're like, I'm helping other people, particularly when we're in the investor space. You go, I'm helping a lot of other people when I'm going to help myself, and you've got to call it delayed gratification, but yeah, you got to go through this phase of like, yeah, you said eating glass. We call it something else sometimes in the office, and you go through this hard
Of,
yeah, mate.
like, can you cross this? And
that's it.
Are you going to get there?
Yeah. I think hard times make some really good people. I want to jump to a question that we have, which is around the Perth market, and you've got boots on the ground, and so I think that's a big question a lot of people have is what is going on in Perth, because it continues to shoot the lights out at the moment. The second part to my question is this growth sustainable?
Yeah, I do get asked a lot. So what's happened for those that haven't been following closely is that when interest rates started going up, Perth was really coming around to it being the focus of the country. And with our relative value compared to the other capitals just got so far out of whack that, it was just obscene as to what you could buy something for here in Perth 2-3 years ago. And so that we started to attract a lot of attention with migrants, with our economy really improving, and it's diversified a lot more to not just being about mining over the last sort of 5-10 years. And with interest rates increasing and being the backdrop, affordability has been a big focus, not just for investors but also migrants. So the bottom end of our market started growing first, and houses, many of them have increased by 70% over the last 3 years. And then we've seen that heat now spreading up to villas and units, and there's still a lot of value buying in villas and units, and the middle segment of the market looks so undervalued compared to the bottom end of the market that growth is now moving strongly to the middle segment. And then once the middle segment goes, it'll spread to the top end of the market, where that'll be the last to really go and round out our cycle.
Okay.
So if you're still buying in the lower end, you need to be selective and not just buy anywhere. A lot of investors chase where's been the strongest growth, and arguably those areas don't have, they've probably got a little bit to go still left in them, but there's plenty of areas that are in the lower end that are relatively undervalued, which I would be focusing on instead of following the herd necessarily.
What do you deem as the lower end?
Well, lower end is really, you need sort of, we're buying for people. If your budget's 500 to 600, I'm suggesting that people buy a villa, something that's in a small group, street front, low or no strata fees. And that's what we're sort of focusing on as a starting entry point, 500 to 600K.
Right, yeah.
Once you can get into 600, then the lower end for houses is really probably 600 to 800K. And a lot of people are in that 600 to 700 sort of price bracket as the lower end for houses now.
Isn't it interesting? Like that's like an entry requirement now is circa 600K.
Yeah.
I remember at the start of the year it was probably like you could get in at 400, 450 thereabouts, and you probably got something of quality. Now it's, buyers agents generally saying don't come to us with a budget sub 500.
Yep.
Yeah.
It depends what your strategy is and your price point is, but a lot of people seem to be driven by that affordability, and we're mainly seeing buyers in that 600 to 700 sort of bracket.
Yeah, cool. Thanks very much.
And the yields are obviously strongest there to offset interest rates, and there's a lot of, even though there's a lot of investors here, our market is still very much driven by home buyers, and the migrants are moving here. We've had the highest population growth by percentage terms over the last year of any capital city, and people would ask, well, how much is left? Like, is it too late for me? And I get asked this all the time. And I've done a really interesting study into, well, how affordable is it still in Perth? And you mentioned earlier that we've got one of the highest average incomes of all the capitals. And when we actually look deeper on tenants' ability to pay more rent and a buyer's ability to pay higher prices, we've got at least 30 to 40% further upside to be in line with affordability of the other capitals.
Wow.
So I think we'll at least have that. And usually when a capital gets momentum, it often keeps going past that, and now that Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane are all sort of starting to, or Brisbane more strongly and Sydney more strongly starting to enter their growth phases, that's really going to give, I think, Perth a longer runway ahead in terms of relative affordability. We're still, we're growing faster than them and catching up, but I still think if they're starting to grow again, that's going to mean that for migrants anyway, choosing where to live, we're still going to be quite very relatively affordable for a while.
Thanks very much. So you still think there's juice left in the tank to keep going, which, if you think you're late to the party, and this is a conversation I always get, which is people are so desperate, like, I need the pre-approval, I need to go now. It's like, I know you want to buy tomorrow, and I love that attitude. It's like, get the strategy sorted, get the right team sorted, get the right structure sorted, and then look for the property, as opposed to start with the property and then then backfill the rest of the strategy as well, mate. Thank you very much. Now, you mentioned you put together a report which sounds like it's fairly robust in terms of purchase price, performance, and then rental yields. Take us through a little bit about, I guess, your methodology, what you've got here, and can people get their hands on this bad boy as well?
Yeah. Well, we'll include a link in the show notes, but it's the best price performers and top rental yields over 23-24 financial year. And in the report, I also go through like how I suggest you look at data and interpret it and use it for suburb selection, and how to not use it. So with so much data being available now, you can get lost in analysis paralysis. And I meet people that we chat to that were looking to buy a year ago and they still haven't bought something because, they're just lost in this data and all the information that you can get. And that's probably one of the biggest advantages of working with a good buyer's agent, because they're going to interpret it and, combine that real world experience with the data to help you make decisions and give you the confidence to take action. And that's probably one of the biggest advantages we can give to people, is how to use this data. So,
okay, great. Look forward to getting a copy of that as well. And speaking of copies, you've also put a book out. What do we got? The Ultimate Home Seller's Guide: How to Master the 5 Price Influences. So take us through, in a nutshell, what's your philosophy? What's the methodology that sits behind this, buddy?
Yeah, well, I have been selling properties for 16 years, and you learn a thing or two over that time when doing it. And I just wrote this to prepare my sellers to really getting the best price, because if they're on the page with doing that, it makes my job a lot easier, and I get them more when we sell. So I broke it down into 5 sort of key tips. And the first is having great presentation for the property. And a lot of these are fairly obvious, but people don't do them. And when they go to a sales agent, the typical sales agent is just like, you want to sell your property? Yeah, let's chuck it on the market. They don't want to spend time and effort really getting that best price. They just want their sale and they just go and do it. And so what I do for our clients is really work on like, what's all the suggested improvements that's going to add the biggest bang for buck. And I use my renovating and property management, experience to advise on the top things is really going to be paint, floor coverings, and landscaping. They add the biggest return for dollar. And so if you can get a property really presenting well, you're going to get buyers a lot more emotional. And in this market, sellers say to me all the time, Jared, do I really need to bother presenting my house really well because the market's super hot? You could put a photo of the letterbox online and probably get 5 buyers by the end of the day. And that's true. But it's actually rare to have a property really well presented. And buyers at the moment don't have the time to put into a property, and they also get their deposit together and they put everything into that purchase, and so they don't have the money to do it either. And they'd rather buy something that's really well presented and pay 20 cents or 10 cents in the dollar of their deposit, and finance the rest and just have a solution. So I find that presenting a property these days gives you a disproportionately higher price, an emotional price that is beyond, because you still stand out. And that's really one of the keys. And I've got 4 other sort of keys that you can read about in the book. But, you know, it makes a huge difference when you're selling. And I love getting the best possible price for our clients when we're selling for them. We've got our buyer's agency side. When we're acting for the buyer, we're going out to the marketplace and getting the best possible price for them. So we never act for 2 people at the same time, just to be clear. We never say to the buyer's agent client, come and buy our property we're selling. No, we don't do that.
No, so very above board. Thanks very much. I want to come back to that time in your life where you said, look, I sold properties, you put that into the business, for example, and it's a conversation that Bernie and I are kind of preparing for another podcast episode, which is called Business Sweat Equity versus Property Equity. And I meet a lot of business owners. I get to see it all. I see the tax debts, I see the business debts, I see the ones with break evens, I see the ones that are making hand over fist cash, I see businesses that are absolute profit machines that are like an ATM, for example. And sitting behind that is a business owner who's put so much equity, sweat equity into growing and building their business. And like you said, you get to a point where you wonder, is it worth it, for example? But it's also a very similar journey in property investing where it's like your back's against the wall, tenants skip, you get damage, for example, and you sit there going, is this worth it? But generally what I find is it's a good combination of the two. So your business generates you the income. The income gives you the ability to go and buy income-producing assets, i.e. properties, and you can then kind of pull the levers in your business, whether you want to pull more cash out or profit, or you want to invest in the business and grow it and scale it, either to sell or to get at that next revenue or profit target as well. So I guess if you reflect on it, not that you can make any changes because it's done, but do you reflect on this just going, if I just held those properties, I would have earned more money than possibly through the business at some point, as well as it swings and roundabouts? Give me your view of the world.
I love both of these vehicles so passionately. And part of I think my success comes from continuously trying to improve what I do in both and seeing how they can work together. And we have such a privilege as a business owner because we have more levers that we can pull. If we need more profit, we'll go and learn how to be better at marketing, learn how to convert and sell, learn how to then manage and have the operations for the team, learn how to have your finances so that you're knowing the metrics and your dashboards and all of that. And that journey's just been amazing. And as I get more profit, I've been very conscious that I don't want to leave it all in the business. Like initially I put everything back into the business to build it to a critical size where I could afford that middle management layer. And then I'm now just doing the parts that I absolutely love. And so I love coming to work every day, and I've leveraged myself to do everything, have an amazing team around me so that I don't have any intention to sell. And I'm sitting on a highly profitable cash machine that, I love. If I could do anything, I would do this. So nice. That's a privilege, and I'm so grateful. And I pinch myself every day that I'm in this position, but I've been conscious to then start looking at how do we best store our wealth outside the business and where is the best use of my time. So, initially when the business wasn't going great, I was adding value, and before I was even in business, I was adding value to chunk up that money, and my time was best really probably spent doing that because I couldn't, generate. That was my way of generating other wealth out over and above the job that I had at the time. But it's another job. Let's not kid ourselves. Renovating a property and overseeing a development, it's another job.
Spot on. Which I have this conversation a lot with people where they've got their active job, which is their salary or their business, for example, that's active. They want to move into a property and they want to move into either developments or renovations or flips. I'm like, that takes you now being very, very hands-on, which is another active role. So if you come out of your business to then work on the property side, just know that you probably can't do both extremely well. You're going to be probably lukewarm in one and hot in the other, unless you're extremely organised, you're an exception to the rule, which generally everyone thinks are the exception to the rule. Yeah. But then I'm like having these conversations going, we need to pick a poison because you can't be two active roles. Either we're shooting for passive and the business gives you the passive income, or property gives you passive, but what's the outcome that we're shooting for?
Well, risk is also another factor in that, because people don't appreciate the risk that developing does. And I've sort of looked at, well, I take, being a business owner, you carry extra risk as well. You know, it's not just come and collect a paycheck for doing nothing. You've got to constantly be growing, improving, and staying current in the marketplace. Yeah. So I sort of take my risks on the business side, and my investing's become a lot more passive and de-risked as a result of the business sort of coming up and filling that role. But earlier on, I was prepared to take the risk on the investing side because I didn't have the business and the other, ways to generate wealth that I do from the business now, if that makes sense.
Well turned around. Thanks very much. Yeah, I guess going back to the core of what you do is property management. So take me through interstate investors that are buying in Perth. What are some of the oversights, errors that you see, or bits of advice that you can probably give to a interstate investor?
Definitely. Well, I think everyone gets really excited about the upfront purchase and choosing a buyer's agent or doing it themselves, and that excitement of the rush of the hunt for something, Yes. And it is exciting. I get a buzz every time I buy a property too, and I've bought quite a few over the years. That's why I love buying them for other people too. Like, the buzz never stops. But what they often don't think about is the boring thing after of, like, how is this property going to be to hold for the next 30 years or longer? And I think a lot of buyer's agents are just focused on the transaction and not as much that what happens after as well. So we sort of come at things from a more unique angle, having that property management depth, that if we're going to manage the property for the person ongoingly, we really want to make sure that this property is going to stack up in good markets as well as bad, because a lot of investors are making compromises at the moment and they don't realize that the property is going to be difficult to rent if things turn around and we're in a cool market again. So, just crazy stuff. Like, we go and inspect properties, and like a shower, for instance, in a one bathroom house, like the shower is like half the normal width. And I recorded a little video of me inspecting it because I had to go in and turn on the diagonal to get in the shower, and I'm pretty broad and quite tall, and so it was laughable. But that's the kind of problem on a house that you can't fix easily. And when you come to rent that property out later, you can find a tenant for it now, but later you're going to struggle. And there's lots of examples like that where people don't think of, is this property set up to be, rental friendly, or is it going to require lots of maintenance, and are the tenants easily going to damage stuff? And so we're really looking at that lens of how can we set this up to be able to forget it and just have really good management to maintain it. And if you turn around and want to sell it someday, you're going to care a lot about all these factors too, because the resale is just as critical to renting it along the way.
Yeah.
So,
spot on. If anyone's listening and self-manages a property, I just want to give yourself an uppercut and just think about, what are you truly doing here? We've had, Jared, you're one of a couple of property managers that we've had across the country. So I've done one podcast, I believe, years ago with Joe Natoli from New South Wales, from Sydney. We've had one from Queensland recently, yourself at WA, Perth. And the common thread here is people undervalue or underestimate how much value a property manager is bringing to the table. I call you guys asset managers, in the sense that you are managing someone's greatest asset. And if you were driving around a $500,000 car, you would be protecting that thing as much as possible. But it's amazing how many people undervalue the strength that a good strategic property manager is coming to the table. So protecting that asset, minimizing the damage, getting the right tenant in there long term, finding ways to increase the yields where possible, minimizing the costs that come with repairs and maintenance because they've got great relationships, and finding out ways to do things not cheaper but more efficient or effective as well. But most importantly, overarching is knowing what rental laws apply to you and what you need to be aware of as well, because they do vary state to state too. So
well said. I was just going to say, one of the biggest sort of factors at the moment is the Residential Tenancies Act changes around the country, and this is particularly related to property management. So I'm really happy from our property manager hat that our state government has made very mild changes. They've had to show that they're, doing some things to, take things a bit more in the favour of the tenants, but they're all workable changes, and it hasn't scared investors off here. And when you look around the country at what other state governments have done with their Residential Tenancies Act changes, like, I'm pretty appalled by some of the things that my Victorian property manager tells me, and I'm like, this can't be real. Like, what a landlord has to do in certain situations and cases, and a lot of state governments have done other changes with raising of land tax and other things lately. So on the Perth front, our state government is really keeping things, they're not sort of pro-investors, but they haven't done anything negative to repel them, which I think is a big positive. And all of the recent changes that we're just implementing, quite a few of them passed a couple of days ago here. So we're still getting all the team up to speed and changing all our forms and processes and other things over, but they're all workable, and all of our existing clients have accepted them, and we feel like it's going to be okay for us. So
nice one. This is what it is. It's just staying ahead of that curve, going, all the changes coming through. You need to know it so you can educate your team of your team, and then in turn your clients as well, and what that means for everyone as well, mate. So that's a good part of being a professional, which is you got to stay ahead of the curve when it comes to changes that are going to impact your client base as well, mate. So kudos to yourself and your team. And mate, I want to see. I'm always very keen to see when people are going to continue to grow their portfolio. Like we say, but anyone listening, the whole idea of this is iron sharpens iron. So we're bringing people to the table that know what they're doing. They're investing themselves. They're on the journey to, one, have a better lifestyle for them and their family, but two, happy to pass on that baton with information that they know, experience that they've built along the journey. And Jared, I want to say thank you very much, mate, for the way you've shown up and the way that you've shared your journey, kind of popped open the hood and being really, really open. And that takes a lot of guts, mate. So thank you.
No worries. It's been good to chat, and I'll give you that link to the report to put it in your show notes, and people can grab a copy of that. And thanks for the opportunity. Not
at all, mate. Thank you. Like I said, I'm looking forward to reading that report as well, and a link to your book. So if you are keen, jump in there, grab some resources. And again, super, super generous when we've got people coming on that they want to share what they've already built or resources for you to access. And if you know anyone that's kind of on the fence when it comes to investing in Perth, unsure, or they're cold, for example, maybe share this episode with them just to see, from someone that's on the ground, their perspective on what's happening in the Perth market, and hopefully that may change or alter their perspective too. But Jared, I want to say thank you very much and look forward to chatting to you soon.
Thanks.
That's a wrap for another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Chat soon.